Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I want to have a little bit of a discussion about budget knives and what I find really makes a budget knife shine for me and make it something I can highly recommend rather than it being just another budget knife. And frankly, let me start out by saying there are a ton of great budget knives out there. And I've said this before, I can't tell you how many videos I've started exactly this way. So I'm granting that point right away. If you have some budget knife out there, if you have some knife that you paid $30 or $40 for and it's fantastic and I don't mention it, it's not because I don't like that knife. It's just because there are so many. Okay. That said, all right, the other point that I feel like I need to make here at the beginning is just because a Rat Model 1 will do a lot of great work and is a highly useful knife, that doesn't mean I'm going to get down on someone who owns, I don't know, a Para-2 or a Manix or, my carry today is the Kaiser Odin. All right, so titanium frame lock, a little bit of a nicer knife. I enjoy this guy a lot. And does this knife do a ton of stuff that the Rat Model 1 doesn't do? No, right? They'll do a lot of the same jobs. There are some ways that the Kaiser's gonna beat it. But I don't want to get into the whole, if you can do everything, if a $30 knife can do everything, a $130 knife can do, well, whatever. Frankly, buy what you like and like what you buy and be happy about it. I'm not going to get into that whole portion of this discussion. What I do want to talk about is the things that I think make a budget knife shine, and things that before I've even bought a knife, but when I'm just still considering, hey, do I want to pick this knife up for review? Is it going to be worth my time and energy or not? These are some of the things that I'm sort of thinking about at that stage of the game. All right, and number one, above everything else, is simplicity. All right. And over again, I've found that knives that try to do too much for too little end up making sacrifices that I'm not happy with. All right. And if you're thinking through this process, if you're from a knife company watching this, look, always err on the side of utility. All right. Never drop down to a worse steel so you can do some other design element. All right. Never drop down to a weaker lock so you can afford to spend money elsewhere. Right. The steel and the lock and the ergonomics are basically the things that matter. Right. Everything else is supplemental. Don't bother with it. So I'm going to give you guys a good example here. So here's a knife that I reviewed, and I didn't absolutely despise it, but this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. CRKT is famous for this. They try to bring in these really elaborate, interesting custom designs at budget price points. I know a big part of the discussion when they're working on how to design this knife is, we've got to get this thing to hit the $40 price point or the $70 price or whatever magic number they have in mind. All right. And they would have been much better off to make this just a plain G10 liner lock, use the design, use even FRN if you want to, but cut corners on the places that don't matter that much, right? Does it need to be a button lock? Does it need to have bearings? No, those things are not adding anything to utility. You could have done this design with a liner lock. You could have upgraded the steel to D2 or something even better. And you probably could have done that even at this price point. Anyway, here's the point. Keep it simple, right? It feels like a lot of companies try to make something more interesting and more elaborate, and in order to afford spending money on that side of the equation, they remove money from somewhere else, and it just ends up being a failure. One of the things that makes the Mora knives so great is that they're just simple. All right, it just is a tool that does what it's supposed to do and does it really well. And I know a couple people talked about this in the Bushcraft Black. I think if you just do a quick Google search, you might end up being led astray. All right, this knife is $36 with the sheath. All right, there are a couple of other variations that get up to like 60, $70. And I think that's, because I got a couple people saying, well, the Mora Bushcraft Black is like quadruple the price of the Companion or the HD. And and I'm not sure that's necessarily true. It is more, I think the Mora Companion is like $15 and this is 36. So it's more than double. Okay. That doesn't at all put it in, make it an expensive knife. 36 bucks is still very, very reasonable. And again, it's just simple and functional and does what I need it to do. And in fact, does it better. And here's the main thing. This is going to be sort of the theme of this video. It does it better than I expect for the price. And that is the really, really cool part. So again, a knife like this, it's it's fine. There are tons of stainless steel liner locks out there that perform reasonably well, but the action on this is so smooth. All right, and the ergonomics on it are so nice, and the blade is just so versatile for all kinds of different tasks. And so, what's cool about this is that for 35 bucks, it really works well. It doesn't just get the job done, but it gets it done better than expected. All right. The Victorinox, again, the thing this is not an expensive knife. I think these can be had for, 40 bucks or something like that. In Canada, they're about 59. So I'm kind of, imagining what the US market price is going to be on these guys. But this is a knife that offers a ton of utility, right? The saw alone are just, really ups what you can do with this knife. I made my boys, a couple of just simple bow and arrows, and they cut down some cattails from across the road to make arrows out of. And this was the knife I used to do practically the whole job, right? I used the saw to cut a little notch in the stick for the string to ride in. I used the blade to clear off a couple places where I didn't want there to be bark. I used the blade as well to cut down the cattails, and it just did a really nice job without costing a lot of money. And offers a lot of utility. Again, here's another example. And this knife is just as tough as can be. Great ergonomics. Look at how thick that blade stock is. And the BD1 steel on this has held up really, really well for me. And again, now when I got this, it was like $46 on Amazon. That's 46 Canadian. Now, I think a couple of you have commented that it's gone up in price, and this might be sitting at around 60 bucks now, and it's not quite as good. There are other knives I would consider for that price for sure, but it's still not terrible. All right. And by the way, the comments that I got about this, I can't remember now if they were Canadian or US comments. So it may still be $40 in the US. Maybe it's just in Canada that it's gone up. But those are a few things, so I want it to be simple and effective. That's the primary thing. Often, again, design flourishes end up taking money away from areas that are more about practicality. Materials, all right. This is one that I find myself complaining about a lot, especially in the steel department. There are some budget steels that are known to be great. So why not use those rather than the ones that are okay, right? ATR 13 MOV is fine. Okay, it's a decent EDC steel, and I'm not really complaining about it. But when you know that 14C28N is going to be way better, or 8CR or 9CR 18 MOV is going to be way better, why not use it, right? They're just better performers for the price. Okay, so I really would like to see, in terms of materials, give me more than I expect. That's what really gets me excited and happy to really rave about how fantastic a knife is. Same thing with ergonomics, right? When I get a knife in hand and it just feels great, and I go, the Rat Model 1 again is a great example. And one of the reasons the Rat Model 1 is in this video and taking such a prominent role is because it's one of those knives that does a lot of things really well. It's simple, it's not flashy, it's not crazy, but it simply works. Okay. So it feels great in hand. Most people who are buying a budget knife, they're often buying it because they want something that they can really get some work done with, and maybe they're even planning to abuse the knife, but they know, hey, if I break it, if I lose it, it's no big deal. I can buy another one for 30 bucks, and it's not the end of the world. Okay, so the implication of that is that for at least some people, they're going to be buying something a little bit cheaper because they really plan to beat on it, and that extra hard work could break it. And so make sure it's really comfortable. Okay, that's kind of an important aspect of being able to work really hard. Availability is another one, and this is one more that I think of as a YouTuber, but even As a consumer, I think there's some points to be made about availability, because if you really, really love it and it's going to be almost impossible to get another one, it kind of goes back to my previous point where if you bought this to use and possibly even abuse, and that's why you're looking for something a little cheaper, well, if if you know you can't replace it, that completely makes that a moot point, because now the knife that you really like and you really want to use, you've got to be super careful with it, because if you lose it or break it, it's irreplaceable. All right. So availability is an important one, and I've got one example that stands out here is the honey badger. There's just no way to get one in Canada. All right, and lots of people have talked about how good they are and how the action is fantastic for the price point, and they've got a couple of models, the extra large model and I think a Warncliffe model that I'd actually really like to check out, but you just can't get them in Canada. And I even called them directly and had a conversation with someone from there saying like, look, I'm a reviewer. Is there any chance you can, make a special exception because I can share your knife a little bit broader? Is there some other way that I can, and I said, look, people want to know, is there something that I can do to get this knife to Canada? Because there are a lot of other Canadians who I'm sure would buy one. Anyway, they were like, no, see you later. It's like, we're not interested in doing anything at all along those lines. And so it was like, okay, fine. But kind of too bad. And because of that issue with availability, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. There. By the way, the Tangram stuff from Kaiser, really nice, really really affordable stuff. Again, really hard to get in Canada. Now, I will say this, and again, I hesitate to recommend this, but from AliExpress, if you go to the Kaiser store, you can be fairly confident that you're getting actual Kaiser stuff and not a copy. And yes, the Chinese companies do copy one another in addition to copying U.S. companies. So you can go to the Kaiser store on AliExpress and you can order tangrams and they will ship to Canada. All right. I guess you could do it in the States too, but you don't need to because you can just get them from Amazon, which is a lot faster and easier and probably cheaper shipping. All right. So the next thing is all of these. So there's the principle we've touched on a number of times is I like there to be something extra. I want it to be exceptional for some reason. So whether it be, the BD1 blade steel that I really like, the ergonomics and overall toughness that I really like, the simplicity, and again, the toughness. And the other thing is, I did a bunch of hard work on some really, really hard wood, and I expected this knife to be way dull. In fact, it was basically just as sharp as it was before I'd done anything with it. So, those are the kinds of things that I really get excited about from a budget knife. A ton of utility, right? If you've got this in your pocket, there are so many things that you can get taken care of with it. And again, it's $40, right? Just fantastic. So those are things that I really, really like. Let me give you just a few recommendations. This is not going to be an exhaustive list. And again, I'm sure, put it down in the comments below the knives that you've had a really good experience with. But I've had tons of great Reich knives. Go over to Reich Knives Canada. In fact, I'll put a link in the description box to them. The F815B is probably still my most recommended budget fixed blade, even though I probably like the design of the Kaiser harpoon a little bit better. The P128, or I think it's P865, the 848, all fantastic Reich knives, and they stand out because 14C28 and steel is my favorite budget steel, but also they've got some different designs that, they're able to keep it simple. They're just simple basic liner locks. They're reliable, they're functional, but then they've got some nice design stuff happening. The Real Steel H6 is very similar and very competitive with the Rat Model 1. And if you get it in 14C28 and steel, I would prefer that steel over the D2. Tons of stuff from Civivi. There's so many Civivis that are good. And at this point, I would say, I don't think I've ever had a Civivi that was actually bad in terms of functionality. I don't always like their designs, but if you like a Civivi design, you're pretty safe. Steel Will has a ton of great budget models. They ever since their success with the Cutjack, they've sort of what would you say? They've copied that design over and over again, and so they've got some great budget models. Victorinox, again, we've already kind of been talking about Victorinox a little bit. The bird stuff, again, is very good. The ones that have missed it recently, some of the US makers, the Bucks and the Gerbers and the CRKTs and Kershaws and stuff, a lot of these companies, they don't have to try as hard because their names are already well known. They're available in Walmart, and people are going to buy them even if they're not doing a great job, because the average knife buyer doesn't know any better. Finally, I want to say a brief word about China. It's hard not to bring this up just a little bit when we're talking about really budget knives, because you've noticed most of the companies I just named, and even the companies that aren't directly Chinese companies, a lot of their manufacturing is done in China. So look, I've lived in China. My sister-in-law is from China. The Chinese people are great. Okay. Now, there's no question they think differently than North America, as does much of the world. Okay. In China, there's not the rugged individualism that the U.S. has. That's just not a priority for them. They're much more communally minded. And I think I've shared this story before. One time I asked one of my students who I was teaching, it's 90 degrees out. Why is no one wearing a t-shirt? And it was explained to me that you don't wear a t-shirt until a certain particular magic date, because that's when everyone switches to t-shirts and you don't want to be the only one. Okay, so you can see that sort of group mentality. You must fit in with what everyone else is doing. Okay, all cultures have that, and it's human nature to want to fit in. Okay, but they take it to an extreme level. All right. Now, having said that, so the people are great. I know lots of people. When I was in China, I had a fantastic experience. Everyone I met was wonderful. It was great. The government, however, even the people don't trust the government. All right. I remember someone got hurt on. I think they kind of tripped and fell in a pothole. I'm not a pothole, I'm sorry, but in a manhole where the cover wasn't seated properly and didn't fit the hole right. And they kept it a secret because they were afraid that, me being injured by something that's supposed to be the responsibility of the government could end badly for me. So that's the problem. It's not the people, it's the government. All right. So let me be clear about that. They do not, I wouldn't put anything past the Communist Party of China. Nothing. All right. So depending on how all this goes and how, international trade relations work out, and various companies, and by the way, countries around the world, Japan recently put a bunch of money, and so did the US, into moving manufacturing essentially home and not being dependent on China. Now, that could put a huge wrench in the works. If a lot of tariffs come into place and if people stop manufacturing in China, a lot of the Chinese produced knives could dry up, because if it's very difficult to get your product out of China once you've made it there, it could be a difficult animal. Now, let me say this. We have to keep in mind, I make no distinction whatsoever between, I don't have a good example of, oh yeah, I do. So I make no exception whatsoever, okay, between this knife and this knife. All right. And the reason I say that is because, this is a subsidiary of Spyderco, and this is just, the only difference between these two is, one, I'm paying a middleman, right? Here I'm paying Spyderco to serve as the middleman between me and Chinese manufacturing. Here, I'm just buying directly from the Chinese manufacturer. All right. The same people are getting the money. So, right, I'm not playing that game. And same would be true of CRKT and Kershaw and Gerber and Buck and lots of companies. All right. So if you're going to be consistent about, I'm not buying Chinese, then, you can't buy the budget Gerbers. You can't buy the budget Buck knives. You've got to buy stuff that says made in the US. And even then there's some pretty, there's some rules around that, where even if you can, you could source all the parts from China and just assemble them in the US and say made in the US. So, okay, be really careful about pointing fingers. you know, that's just part of this discussion that needs to be brought up, because I feel like people are very, very inconsistent about all of this. Now, all that said, I'm totally aware of the fact that the Chinese government is evil and does not play by the same rules as the rest of the world, right? It's not a global village, we're all in this together mentality. It is a China must win at all cost mentality. Okay, very, very different approach. And I wouldn't argue with that for 1 second. That's exactly the way it is. Okay. Now, the last thing I have to say about this is when it comes to budget knives, I've got to bring up Cold Steel because they're kind of right on that borderline. But there are a bunch of Cold Steel knives. Okay. By the way, not made in mainland China, made in Taiwan, which I think is a better choice. Okay. Um, and Cold Steel, they've got knives that are like just a hair above. So, you know, between 70 and $100 in that $30, in that window that's probably a little outside most people's idea of budget, but fantastic knives that are very affordable. The Code 4, the Broken Skull, the American Lawman, the Recon 1, you know, we could probably name more. I think the Tylite comes in at a fairly a budget price. Anyway, there's lots of them, okay, that are not made in China. They're made in Taiwan. They're still fairly affordable. And frankly, you know, I would take a Code 4 or, you know, an American Lawman or a Recon 1 over 6 Civivis. All right, I really would. They're fantastic knives, and especially if you're someone watching this who is interested in only owning one knife. Now, this is not the most budget option of the Recon 1 because it's a limited edition through Warriors and Wonders up here in Canada. But again, very, very good example of a knife that will do a ton. And this knife will really, really put in a lot of work for you and perform really well for a very comfortable, very affordable price point. All right, so that's all I've got here. But the main things I'm looking for, again, just to reiterate, you know, I like a knife that's simple. I like a knife that, you know, goes above and beyond what I expect. All right, those are the main things in some area. Okay, so this one, you know, it's tough, it's effective, and it held an edge. It has held an edge amazingly well for me. This knife, again, just the toughness, the durability, the ergonomics. You know, again, there are lots of budget knives like that. Civivis, for example, have great actions, and I've never had one that doesn't. That you can get great steel. The HCR, wow, 9CR, 18 MOV, great steel, 14C28N. So there are those primary criteria where it's a simple knife, it does what it's supposed to do, but then it has something a little extra, something that puts it above the crowd in some meaningful way. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I know this got a little long, but there were a number of points that I kind of wanted to get into there, and I knew I needed to bring up the China stuff just a little because of all the examples of Chinese stuff I was mentioning. Again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to use those links down below. That does help the channel a whole lot, and it helps you too because there's a discount code there. We'll talk to you soon.